It's nice to have you today. My name is Erik Schmiegelow. I am a director at Hivemind Technologies. We are a tech consultancy focused on data-driven decision-making for renewables and sustainable industries. So today we're going to talk about how we can turn net zero ambitions into actual operations to make them actually happen. So if we're just looking at taking stock of what the actual situation is in most corporations, well, everyone has a net zero commitment. And that's also kind of obvious. We just have to look outside why this is important, and no one can afford not to do something about net zero and sustainability. The problem is that most people don't really have the operations to actually deliver net zero in their organizations. You have to retrofit things, and that's not easy. So now we're basically in a stage where just, producing Excel files and giving that to investors or to authorities and councils just to say, yeah, we're sustainable is not enough, because we really need to have something that executes net zero. There's more scrutiny as well, right? People are just really want to know, are you moving the needle? Are you changing things in your organizations to deliver your commitments? So essentially what that means is that not only you say, I've got these targets, but you also have to measure them properly beyond the said Excel report. And you really need to basically tap into your supply chains, your production facilities, and whatever your business is, and monitor what's happening. And based on that data that you collect, you need to be able to act and scale. So it's essentially a workflow that presents itself in order to implement factual net zero and not just paper net zero. So essentially, if we're looking at what that means, we're going to be measured by our ability not to present goals, but to actually deliver net zero commitments that are measurable and scalable across your organization and your production. So that leads us to one point, right? One big problem. That's what we call the net zero execution gap. What does that mean? It's specifically how you can map ambition to actual impact, right? So where does the ambition and the goals that you set yourself in your organization get delayed or blocked within the actual execution within the organization? So we're looking at problems like fragmented data. Are you getting enough data from your production facilities, your suppliers, to really be able to say, what's the footprint on those parts of the supply chain? You've got legacy systems that are difficult to integrate. You can't, it's been there for forever. You need to get some additional data points, or you need to execute something new on top of it. They're resistant to change. That also slows decisions, because people are usually involved in the process and need to basically let's say, act on recommendations, emails, meetings, whatnot. Because the value chain does not incorporate net zero at all, the ownership of the process is also split, right? So there's fractional responsibilities in the decision making. So that really puts the spotlight on the actual problem, the gap between ambition and execution reality. If we look at exactly the problem, it comes down to the fact that existing workflows are not built for net zero. They're just not built, right? So this manual, it traces existing evolved processes that were not geared to incorporate these the data collection and the decision making and the measurements that are necessary. At the same time, we've got some pilots that sit in innovation labs but are disconnected from the actual production. right? Also, like, let's say there's an ESG actionable pilot that was started in your organization in a lab. People are just building something, but it can't be integrated properly because there's no direct connection into the actual workflows. The audit bar is rising constantly because obviously the markets and investors are asking for it, but also regulators like CSRD are gradually tightening the net on what it means to be compliant or certifiable. On top of it, carbon emissions don't care which process flow is just currently delivering a data point. They happen across the board. And it starts from, let's say, sourcing materials to fleet and logistics, all the way to your production lines, if you're in the production business. So essentially, there is the necessity to capture these data points across the board and across system boundaries. But one of the major obstacles is the inability to record and observe in near real time, right? Because most of the processes that are in place, even the ones that have good data points, are after the fact. So generally you get the reports after a day, if you're good, mostly after a week or a month. And then you basically can act or decide upon the data that you collected 4 weeks ago. Problem is that often, in order to really reduce carbon emissions, you need to act immediately, right? When it happens, and not 1 day, 2 days, a week, or a month later. What we're looking at here is moving from just reporting ESG to operating it. So essentially leaving behind what we're currently doing most of the time, manual inputs, quarterly cycles, Excel files sent from one unit to the other and compiled and aggregated across multiple desks in a manual process driven by human beings, which is inherently static and backwards looking, and amounts to nothing more than just documenting what happened in the past, to a situation where we basically we're basically capturing live data streams, live sensors, live data points and KPIs from everywhere across the organization in near real time, so that we inform the decision and we can take the decision when it has its the most impact. That's pretty much immediately. And at the same time, we design systems that respond to those decisions and basically result in sustainability and carbon footprint and net zero management being a central operating function rather than the reporting one. That's the biggest distinction and the most important aspect of changing the way we operate and we think about sustainability across organizations. Yeah. So how do we solve that? Well, we've got a bit of a product name for essentially an approach. We call it Speedboat, right? In the context that a speedboat is nimble and can operate quickly and can run in parallel to the organization, which is usually just a bigger boat, a cargo ship, for instance. And this approach entails building capabilities and tapping into like the data streams and incorporating yourself into the organization as an operating function. We're going to explore what that actually means in the next minutes. So essentially, the first cornerstone of this approach is to connect to all data suppliers within the organization, to implement governance with controls, and to consistently measure outcomes. Use AI to do so, and redesign your workflows around the simple assumption that you want to deliver the impact first, and then you redesign the process to serve that purpose. And you integrate human expertise and combine it with the capabilities that AI presents nowadays. So what that looks like is relatively simple. It's 5 steps. We sense first. So essentially it starts with collecting and ingesting live data from our operations, from our different process steps, be it supply chain, production, financial systems, into a data platform, right? Which allows us to measure outcomes as they happen. So it basically involves also tapping into operational databases, into data streams and monitoring systems to collect that data. The second bit is reasoning. So that's where we use AI, large language models, capabilities of reasoning and thinking based on the data streams that they collect, right? With a simple function. Aggregate these data points, measure the CO2 impact, and assess what immediate operating decisions can we take based on that input. Rinse, repeat. Then, as a third step, we come to the decision. And obviously that's where human in loop is super important, because AI systems have the ability to assess, aggregate, and reason to a certain extent. But basically taking the decision is something that humans need to do. And the decision is based on the recommendation provided by the AI. This, so far, also resembles what we've been doing in machine learning systems and predictive systems for a long time. It's just accelerated with the ability to integrate large language models as reasoning machines on top, without having the overhead of bespoke training that is required when we build classical machine learning pipelines. And lastly, after the decision and reasoning step, we have the action that is essentially follows the decision, right? So essentially, if it means to throttle some generators and buy instead energy from the grid to lower the carbon footprint, or basically and when we're talking about energy management, that's something that can happen in real time based on a system like this, or basically tap into battery electric storage systems to provide extra power, etc. So essentially having a continuous loop, reinforced loop of assessment, measurement, assessment, decision, and action built in one single pipeline. And lastly, governance is super important. Setting up guardrails for those decisions and creating auditability on top of the tool chain to assess and improve the system, but also to be able to report adequately to auditors about the effect and the impact of the system itself. So essentially, if we're looking at an example in fleet, the EV charging and fleet management system, we're basically using that speedboat approach for energy and charging telemetry. So essentially, imagine you have a fleet of vehicles and chargers, and you continuously monitor the flow of electricity, the battery state, charging sessions, etc. Supplier and grid data, the cost of energy on the markets, to basically integrate all those data flows into the speedboat platform that assesses all of these flows in real time and creates recommendations for operations that allow us to do two things really: lower our carbon footprint, achieve net zero goals, and be financially sound at the same time, with reporting and decision outcomes. Then the output gives us asset usage optimization and lower operating emissions. So this was as an example where do speedboats create real impact. So essentially it's about operational efficiency. So essentially with this approach and these systems that really require modern data platform ingestions from the operating system plus large language models, It gives us the ability to reduce waste and improve asset utilization, which as such has a financial benefit. That's also a good point in the conversation, where you can basically also prove that being net zero efficient also has a significant financial impact. It does not cost more, which is often something that we hear from, let's say, skeptics. This is an approach that delivers both. If you're more economical about the usage of your assets, you reduce waste and you optimize utilization where needed in near real time, you save money and save carbon emissions. Second impact is the ability to have clearer and more near real-time insights in your operations and assets, and be able to report in near real time to anyone who wants to know, be it your organization, your finance department, your investors or authorities, where you are, where you're standing, and how you can mitigate risks and improve the performance of your operations. And lastly, what it also gives you is the ability to coordinate distributed systems, because as a side benefit of this approach, you basically have a central monitoring tool for all your operational assets and production capabilities, which basically comes for free as a prerequisite for an operational speedboat of energy. So we at Hivemind, we don't just talk about speedboats, we build them. We have here a few examples of work that we did for clients across the board, mostly in energy and mobility, where we basically delivered real-time decision systems for these clients, with the ability to trace and monitor their asset performance and optimize their operations. Lastly, how do you actually get there in terms of building a speedboat and starting with your project? So first, you need to identify a decision environment. So what that really means is to define a workflow that exists currently. For instance, ESG reporting is a good one, because it is already there, but it is beset with problems, as mentioned earlier, with a lot of loops and breakages in the system. But that can basically be the environment for decision making, where you basically say, okay, we're going to transition from the current ESG model to a speedboat approach, where we basically say, this is the impact, that's the target, and then we're going to walk backwards using the tooling that we have in the speedboat approach to build something that is fully automated and runs in real time with human loop supervision. Then that's essentially the redesigning stage, where you basically take the existing model and then go back and walk backwards to define the workflow, and then you build it to run it safely. So obviously start with one single use case, saying, okay, this is one vertical slice across the organization that gives me the ability to validate this outcome backwards all the way to the source and the mission. And then you build that, validate and prove to the organization that it works, and rinse, repeat, and onboard one use case after use case until you basically have full operational visibility of the platform and the monitoring process. So essentially, when we're thinking about what that means for net zero leaders, it is really understanding that AI pilots is not enough. Just starting an AI pilot somewhere in a lab environment, it does prove what is technically possible, but does not move the needle. You need to incorporate that as an operating capability. Dashboards are good because they basically display information, but not enough, because a dashboard alone does not allow us to take decisions and act upon what we see. They just inform the crowd. So it is really also about implementing a governed execution of that process and of the insights that you gain from the data that you get. And lastly, it's about commitment, right? Essentially, the organization has to say, we want to do this. We understand that net zero, decarbonization, and sustainability commitments are just not a piece of paper, a mission statement that we put on a PowerPoint, but something that we actually want to do as part of our process about implementing change within the company. So essentially, the speedboat approach gives a safe and technically proven way of implementing that change and backporting the insights into the organization and the workflow processes. So pilots, dashboards, and initiatives, and GenAI projects and POCs have delivered what's possible. Implementing change is what's really required. Operating capability is what is now necessary to really move the needle on net zero. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. We want to deliver a blueprint for essentially for changing and then turning ambition into operating real capability. Thank you very much.